There's been a lot of talk about crowdfinancing as a potential source of revenue for independent film projects, and I think we're just going to hear more of it as there's more and more high-profile crowdfinance projects in the news. If you weren't paying attention this week, Kickstarter had a great week with their first 2 projects to crack $1 million in financing, including one, Double Fine Adventures, which was a video game project being headed up by Tim Schafer, who's a very well-known designer, which raised more than $1 million in less than 24 hours, which is really impressive. As I was talking to some folks on Twitter, though, I have real concerns about crowdfinancing as a major source of revenue for independent film projects. Not all projects. I think there are some that can benefit, but for many. And since I was asked for more details, I decided that would be a great topic for a first video BlogFox. A quick background if you're not familiar on how crowdfinancing works through sites like Kickstarter or Indiegogo or Rocket Hub or Haricot in Canada. Think of it like a PBS pledge drive for a very specific project. If you're a creator who has a project that requires some type of risky capital investment up front, crowdfinancing is a way that you can maybe raise that money so that you don't find yourself out of pocket and not able to make it up on the back end. So a prime example would be a band wanting to release an album can basically do a fundraising drive where they offer at different reward levels. If you donate $20, once the album is done, we'll give you a copy of the album. If you donate $40, we'll give you an autographed copy of the album. If you donate $1,000, the band will come over to your house and cut your lawn. In this type of way, they can try and raise the money that they need to do the project that they want to do and not have it be risk revenue. Crowdfinancing isn't investment because then the Securities Commission would get involved. You don't have any kind of profit participation in it. It's a lot more similar to sort of a microfinancing where you're trying to get sort of small amounts of money from large amounts of people and sort of minimize the risk. It probably works best when you're creating physical goods and services, things like books and movies, or even some consumer goods, because your rewards are actually can be the goods you're trying to create. It's a little more, ephemeral if you're trying to finance a dance production, because that's not something that you can hand out. So you end up in a quandary then of trying to figure out, well, what kind of rewards can you quantify to interest people in supporting your mission? I do have to say, I strongly think the model works better with all or nothing systems like Kickstarter. With Kickstarter, you set a goal for your project. So the cost of me recording my album is going to be $10,000 to get session musicians and a mixer in to mix it. And so I set my project as a goal of $10,000 and I set a time limit to reach it. And if I raise the $10,000 through soliciting, individual donations from people over the internet before the time period ends, then I get all that money from Kickstarter minus their processing fee. If I fall short, if I only raise $9,000 at the end of the project, all the money is actually returned to the donors. I think this is a better system because it's specifically designed to avoid the worst possible situation an artist could be in, which is having some of the money they need to do their project. And anyone who's ever done any type of a creative project has probably been in that position before where you don't have the money you need to do it right. And you end up having to make the decision, do I radically alter what I'm trying to do to work with the resources that are available to me? Or do I not? Do I just not do the project? And the problem with something crowdfinancing is you've promised people you're doing a specific business plan that you've laid out. So it's a little, I find it a little problematic if you've got a situation where that money is still going through to the project, but you're no longer able to deliver on what you thought you were going to be able to do. And this is kind of the primary tenet of why I get uncomfortable with crowdfinancing for large projects. And for the record, I'm not just talking about film projects. I'm equally uncomfortable with video game projects of a certain size, or physical good or manufacturing projects, or creating business projects, or any kind of a development project that's tougher to qualify in terms of an absolute, I am trying to make project X. I think the reasons for this are actually pretty obvious. Anyone who's been involved with film for any length of time knows how difficult it is to actually quantify what resources you need to complete a project. And especially people beginning their journey into film or less experienced in the journey on film really undercut these estimations all the time. There's a great post I'm going to link here called "How Much Time Does It Cost to..." There's a really great analogy on the web, which I'll link here, about estimating how much time it takes to walk from San Francisco to LA. And the point of the analogy is just to point out, with projects of a certain complexity, how difficult it is to estimate what is required to accomplish them. And the problem with not having an accurate estimate going in is you fall into that all or nothing camp, where all of a sudden you have raised money and have promised to deliver a specific good or a specific type of project that you no longer have the financing to deliver. And that's a really bad situation to be in as a filmmaker, and it's not conducive. This leads to the other problem, that the industry itself builds itself around some of these complications by building in things like completion bond insurance, which any film over a certain level has gotten, which is basically bringing in a third party to oversee all your budgeting, all your financing decisions, all your production decisions, and also giving them the power to take the film away from you if they think you're getting to a point where you're not going to be able to deliver to the people who financed your film what you said you would. Now, completion bond financing is a real hassle. Nobody likes doing it. It's very expensive. And especially on very, very low budget films, you just think about all you could accomplish with that money as opposed to acquiring that completion bond. So I guarantee people who are financing or attempting to finance larger film projects throughout, a self-financing campaign aren't going to be spending their money on completion bonds, nor should they. The money they should be raising should be going on the screen. But what you're really doing now is you're foisting the inherent risk of filmmaking, which is, despite its advanced nature, an extremely risky business, off on individual, what are essentially friends and family investors, because they are basically giving you money. It's whether you want to think of it as a grant or a donation or begging, they've given you money free and clear to accomplish something, and maybe you're not going to be in a position to do that. Two other issues with crowdsourced financing that I think are problematic when it comes to film. One is simply the amount of money that you can be raised. Yes, I gave an example of a couple of projects that have raised over $1 million. There's a handful of examples that have easily raised over $500,000 or $600,000. A couple of things with those projects. One, generally the ones that really succeed are the ones driven by known quantities. People who are already famous in the field for what they do, or can tap into fame that they have in other areas. Either people who are very well known on the internet, or famous actors, or famous bands who are leveraging their fame and notoriety in other areas to support a project in some way. I won't mention it specifically, but there was a Kickstarter I saw that had raised over $100,000 for a film project, because it was to be directed and scored by a band that was very well known. So that's not really a Kickstarter, from what I read, that was being supported on the merit of the film project. It was being supported by people who are fans of the band and interesting to see them work in a different media. That's fine. I don't begrudge them their ability to transfer fame in one area to their own personal gain. Again, though, these aren't avenues that are going to work for people who don't necessarily have an extremely large fame base to draw on. The second one is just the reality of the volume of financing. If you look at the stats of Kickstarter, who is by far the largest crowd financing system for 2011, they raised over $32 million for successfully financed film projects, which is amazing. You absolutely can't poo-poo that, because that's a huge source of revenue that wouldn't necessarily have been available to those projects. But that was also split between 3,200 projects, which means that on average, projects were raising around 10 grand. Now, also those numbers were skewed by a couple that have received, a lot more than 10 grand. So, I mean, there were successful projects financed at $500, $1,000, $10,000, all the way up to $100,000 or a couple $100,000. these aren't enough money to make sustainable projects. They're great in one-offs. They may help a film. There was lots of instances of films overcoming hoops where documentaries had been stymied with unexpected archival costs, needed some finishing funds, somebody wanted to go out and investigate something. Those are all, valid uses, or to go towards specific parts of projects. But it's never actually going to support quality, sustainable production at the level that it needs to be. The corollary trouble with crowdfinancing as well, and I've already started to hear this already, is that it also gives an excuse for existing distribution chains who should be assuming the risk of pursuing new and interesting projects to kind of slough it off on the invisible hand of the economy. To say, well, really, this is kind of a new and exciting and different idea. If it's so good, you should have no trouble getting crowdfinancing for it. Or conversely, I've seen the situation of people who've gone out to try and get crowdfinancing for a project and then have had a much harder time approaching traditional broadcasters and distributors who've sort of gone, there was so little interest in this project at the crowdfinancing stage, why would we really get on board to support it when it doesn't have a groundswell of popular support like these other projects? And that comes back to kind of the other side of the internet fame thing, which is the type of projects which do really well. Let's take documentaries, are ones which are on topics which are already well known. It's a lot easier to raise money for a documentary on something that already has a groundswell of social interest than an area that's being completely ignored. And that's, again, kind of not the point of crowdfinancing, because the point should be, if things are generally already understood and have that groundswell support, they should be easier to finance through traditional channels. Finally, there's just a problem of volume. As more and more things get crowdfinancing, there's going to be more and more projects piling into that marketplace. And I gotta say, that's just going to make it harder and harder to get any kind of significant traction through that avenue. Like I said, Kickstarter reported they had over 3,200 successfully, 32,000 successful projects funded in film and video in 2011. And I just took a quick gander through their current active projects in the film category right now, and they're well on track to do more than twice that this year in 2012. I had estimated sort of north of 80,000 projects potentially in film, and that's just that much more noise to stand out above. So in conclusion, I actually think this is a great avenue for certain types of projects where you're able to leverage some type of notoriety in another field, or you're looking for a very small specific amount to accomplish something. I think a great example of this would be the Little Miss Jihad team, which is basically trying to raise a very reasonable amount of funding for a very specific purpose. In this case, they'd like to offer honorariums or some type of payment to the crew for the film that they're doing. But it's not the project itself. The real reality is, despite the best intentions and the most talented filmmaking teams in the world, sometimes film projects just go down. And we have yet to see a huge, high-profile, multi-$100,000 Kickstarter project go down and just not complete, but it is going to happen. And I'm really curious what the response of the donors to that cause and people who are really adamant about supporting the crowdfinancing community feel when that happens. As always, this is just a starting point. If you'd love to talk about this some more, I'd love to hear what you have to think. Please leave comments at my website at bradfox.com, because that's the comment thread I'll try and keep an eye on. If you've got questions for me for future video blog foxes, there's a page also on bradfox.com/contact where you can send me questions or things you'd like me to ramble about on future video blog foxes. And as always, I'm on Twitter at @blogfox. Thanks for watching.